Okay, well, it is 1 o'clock, so.
Right, here we go.
Welcome, everybody, to this afternoon's Chicago Wilderness Alliance Cafe. We're going to get started in just a few minutes, so we're letting folks in, but thank you all for being here promptly. I'm going to go ahead and share a slide of the title of the cafe. So if this isn't what you were here for, then you are signed into the wrong Zoom. And if you need to skedaddle, that's fine. But if this sounds interesting to you and you want to stay here with us, you are more than welcome. We'll get started in just a few minutes.
Yeah, when the tide of people kind of slows a little bit, signing on, I'll go ahead and just get started. And it does kind of seem to be slowing down a little bit, not entirely. But we've got a pretty full agenda, so I guess I'm just going to go ahead and get started. My name is Patty Vitt. I am in my full-time job, I'm the manager of natural resources with Lake County Forest Preserve District. I also serve as the team lead for the Healthy Landscapes team for the Chicago Wilderness Alliance. And I'm really glad that you could be here today. The Healthy Landscapes team has been working for pretty much the past year, maybe a little bit more, to come up with these 10 working streams and then prioritize initiatives or programs that we want to really kind of take on over the next year. And we're going to be hosting a series of cafes for each of the priorities that we have identified over the past year. And so this is the first cafe for the kind of the new initiatives that have been introduced at the Chicago Wilderness Congress. And I also want to let you know that there is a follow-up kind of business meeting next week, January 24th. That's separate, and it, will kind of take on a little bit more of what roles are available, what people can do. It's definitely more business as opposed to informational such as this. But I really want to especially welcome all of you who are joining us for the first time, whether you signed up for Congress in November or maybe found out about our work through another channel. And I also want to let you know that I am happy to have you reach out to me individually to let me know that you're interested in any particular direction that the Healthy Landscapes team is working on. And so at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Brandon to just do kind of an overview of the green initiatives and how our Healthy Landscapes team fits into that.
Thank you, Patty. Hi, everybody. Welcome on this sort of overcast and gloomy January afternoon. Hope everyone had a good long weekend. I'm Brandon Hayes. I'm founder and principal of Bold Bison Communications and Consulting. And how we work with Chicago Wilderness Alliance is we're working with each of the green initiative teams on sets of priorities and on being work forward in 2023. And we were also involved in helping to put together Congress back in November. And hopefully a lot of you were there at Congress. Unfortunately, we couldn't talk to everyone. This was such a great group. And I just want to reiterate and echo Patty's welcome, especially to those of you for whom this is your first sort of experience, or maybe Congress was your first experience of Chicago Wilderness Alliance. And although many of you who are on the call know this, I just want to share a little bit about what Chicago Wilderness Alliance is, a little bit about these initiatives that both Patty and I have mentioned in the past 5 minutes, and then a bit sort of a deep dive a bit into managing healthy landscapes. And then we're going to turn it from that sort of overview of the initiative to 2 great panels we have lined up, one on cooperative weed management areas and the other on prescribed burns. And you'll see those rising up when we talk about the priorities for managing healthy landscapes. But first of all, I know a lot of you know this, but just sort of to ground us in it, the Chicago Wilderness Alliance is a regional collaborative of hundreds of partner organizations and individuals working to implement landscape scale approaches to conservation in and around the southern shores of Lake Michigan, including partners from Southwest Wisconsin, Northeast Illinois, Northwest Indiana, and Southwest Michigan. We bring leaders, experts, mid and young career conservation professionals together from all sectors of the partnership footprint to share diverse voices, perspectives, and work toward a common vision. We're going to talk a bit about that common vision in a moment. And all of this is to create and protect a vibrant, accessible region where people and nature thrive. So we keep talking about all these initiatives, and I know a lot of you know this, but for those of you who don't, let's talk a little bit about it. So the Green Vision initiatives, which previously were the Green Vision goals, they are a framework to guide our work, and they're inspired by the 30 by 30 initiative that was issued in an executive order from President Biden with the goal of conserving 30% of land and water by 2030. And this brings the United States in line with sort of initiatives across the globe in terms of thinking about how much land and water needs to be protected. So the Chicago Wilderness Alliance took that sort of goal, thinking about that 30%, and thought about how does that apply to our area, to our region, this region with a legacy and an ongoing, legacy of urbanization, a major global city, and all sorts of land use, because that land use and that water use and the way that we live here on the land is part of how we're going to get to that 30% conservation goal. And that includes agricultural, residential, and corporate. And so the 7 themes in the green initiatives you see before you here on the screen, and they're in this circle because one leads to another. One isn't a priority over another. We use the shorthand numbers, so sometimes as you get more involved with Chicago Wilderness, you'll hear about Initiative 1 or Initiative 5 or Initiative 6, but that isn't so much a ranking as it is a flow from one to another. And so they are in front of you: managing healthy landscapes, growing with agriculture, again, sort of farmland coming right in that, almost first breath, prioritizing green infrastructure, especially because of the urbanization in our region, protecting landscapes for biodiversity conservation, increasing equitable access to nature, taking climate action, and of course, protecting healthy water. And in addition to a series of cafes that's going to explore the Managing Healthy Landscapes initiative that was launching today, this also will launch, as Patty mentioned, an introductory and sort of priority series of cafes for each of the initiatives. So today we're doing a little bit of this high-level overview around the Managing Healthy Landscapes initiative, and then diving deep in those 2 priorities. And the next one up after this is taking climate action. And that cafe is going to be, I believe, on the 24th, but I might be misspeaking. I will double check that before the day is done. So in terms of messaging, we thought a lot in 2022 with the work of some great partners and consultants about how to talk about this work, because we want this work to go beyond those of us who are part of the Chicago Wilderness Alliance. And so, thinking about that increase of acres, that increase percentage in terms of healthy landscapes, and really kind of laying out a goal. That goal that I want to draw your attention to there, the most important thing on this slide is that by 2030, Chicago Wilderness Alliance will increase its healthy landscapes within the 4-state region from 150,000 acres to 234,000 acres. So that's actually putting a number on sort of the work before us in terms of moving the Managing Healthy Landscapes initiative toward that goal in 2030. So how are we going to get there? We've developed a series of strategies that Patty referred to about how we as a collective, again, of government agencies, individuals, nonprofit organizations, volunteer groups, all sorts of great people working, corporations working toward this goal. Those strategies include develop a regional invasive species management strategy. And a key piece of thinking regionally about managing invasive species is what we want to get some insight from our speakers today, which is the idea of a cooperative weed management area and how that can benefit the Chicago wilderness region. Educating private, public, and corporate stakeholders about invasive species. We know that there's a lot of on-the-ground work in each of the individual agencies and nonprofits and NGOs that have programming to reach out to landowners, to reach out to volunteers, to reach out to the general public and help them understand. And we want to help shine a spotlight across the Chicago Wilderness Alliance on those good efforts. Wildlife species management, thinking about what are those best practices. And that's a bit of what we're going to think about today too, because although prescribed burning is one of our strategies, that is of course a great best practice in terms of management. So the Chicago Wilderness Alliance and the Managing Healthy Landscapes initiative being a source for that learning, those resources, that understanding about how we can collectively move things forward in a professional way. Speaking of sort of moving things forward, there's also volunteer stewardship being very important. And there are multiple folks who we're going to hear from on the call today. And we'll encourage all of you in the Q&A, in chat, whether you want to turn your microphone on and ask a question. A lot of you work with volunteers. A lot of you work with folks who do that legwork on the ground to actually get this done. Because if we stuck to just those who work in agencies and organizations, we would never accomplish that impressive 234,000 acre goal. It would just be impossible in the region. Climate change adaptation, like I mentioned, the very next Café around an initiative is going to be focused on climate. And that's something that threads its way through all of the other initiatives, and thinking both how do we mitigate the impacts of climate, but then also what does a healthy landscape and what does managing a healthy landscape mean in terms of a changing climate. And that's something that this group, this initiative team has its eye on. Grassland, shrubland, birds. We are the prairie state after all. And we need to make sure that those often very endangered species are healthy, and also learn from what they can teach us. Learn from what sort of species decline or recovery tells us about the way that we're managing healthy landscapes in the region. And that ties into the larger question of ecological data management and sort of thinking about what are some of those pieces of information, what are some of those tools that can reverberate across the region, can reverberate across sectors, whether it's universities or NGOs, but can also potentially reverberate across the state. And that's some ongoing conversations we're having there about how does Chicago Wilderness Alliance reach out further than the region into the 4 states in which we work. Oak ecosystems, and that's very near and dear to my heart. With another hat, I help to coordinate the Oak Ecosystem Recovery Plan that's moved forward both under the auspices of Chicago Wilderness Alliance and the Chicago Region Trees Initiative. And that's collaborative efforts to maintain those remnant oak woodlands and make sure that we are able to plant and expand those oak woodlands across the region and keep those legacy ones as healthy as possible. And that will tie back to the Cooperative Weed Management Area, invasive species, and prescribed burn that we're going to talk about today. And then of course, prescribed burning, which we're going to hear a lot about in the second hour this afternoon. So that was a lot. You're like, gosh, Brandon, that's so much that you know is ahead of us that we have to work on, that we're trying to do, that's so much that we're prioritizing. You know, are we building on anything? And well, you know what? Indeed we are. We are building on a lot of accomplishments within this initiative, including documentation and digital mapping of pre-European settlement vegetation. I cannot tell you, for instance, in the oak ecosystem recovery plan, how important that is, how important understanding how oak ecosystem existed in the region is, and that spreads out across a whole different types of ecologies in our region. Development of a regional strategy to control invasive purple loosestrife. And so we'll be learning from that as we think about those larger contexts of cooperative weed management areas. Prescription fire training for Midwest ecosystems, again, building on this legacy. And we'll talk about how we continue that today. The plans of concern monitoring program development. And then supporting priority species. Chicago Wilderness itself identified sort of priority species that are indicator species for the region that help us to understand what a healthy landscape means. And again, the oak ecosystem recovery plan that I mentioned earlier that was developed by Chicago Wilderness. And I want to read to you, after sort of running you through all of those slides of all of those words, and we will share this out so you can read it and you can pore over it yourself without any pictures. But I want to leave you with the why it matters. While the four-state region is home to many diverse plant communities and animal species, many of our protected landscapes are struggling and need proper care and management so they may thrive. Healthy biodiverse landscapes are not only essential to support robust wildlife and climate-resilient ecosystems, they also offer respite for people and improve our overall quality of life. So that's a snapshot. That's a brief overview of what we have ahead in terms of goals for the Managing Healthy Landscapes initiative, where we come from, sort of the work, that foundational work over the years that we are building on as we're having these conversations today. And two of the conversations that we're having are these very key priorities around a cooperative weed management area idea for this part of the state and this part of the country, and then also prescribed burning and what that can look like in sort of robust sort of context here in the Chicago region. Before we turn to those conversations though, I just want to take a moment, open it up and see if anyone has any questions, any comments, anything to add. So the floor is open. Feel free to drop something in the chat or turn your mic off and make your voice heard, or turn your mic on and make your voice heard.
Brandon, could you maybe frame up sort of a working schedule for 2023 with all these things, where we would like to be by the end of the year?
Sure. And Patty, feel free to jump in too as we're talking. I'm gonna pull this down to jump in too, because Patty is one of the leaders of the initiative team. But one of the things that we want to prioritize this year is really diving in where there's a lot of energy in the initiatives. There's so much that we saw there. And so there are kind of a couple of key things. Seizing where there's energy around the network and around the alliance in order to move things forward. And that's why we're starting with the cooperative weed management area and prescribed burns, because there's a lot of energy around those two to kind of jump forward and move forward. The other big key piece sort of looming over all of the plans and sort of the initiatives this year is the potential for increased funding from the federal government, from the Inflation Reduction Act, and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that's already beginning to come down through the Forest Service and through the Department of Natural Resources. So being able to take advantage of those increased funds in thinking about how we move some of these forward, and thinking also in terms of what does it mean to move it forward collaboratively. So in terms of what we're doing, in the winter and the spring, we're going to be working sort of very intensely to get those pieces that have a lot of energy, like the CWMA piece, sort of up and moving forward in a robust way. Also engaging where there's a lot of energy, but like potentially around urban canopy work, where there's some renewed energy and interest in leadership that's bubbled up. just even in the past week, and then think about, okay, if we're moving these along in a really robust way, then in terms of the other priorities, what are sort of like those next ones that are ready to go and the next ones to be ready to go after that? Because it doesn't work to sit and sort of try to tackle all of those priorities at once. And if you really want to dive deep into sort of thinking about how we're going to do that, I do invite you to join us for the initiative team meeting, which is next Tuesday, the 24th, is when that meeting is going to be, where you can sort of dive in and kind of roll up your sleeves and think about how to move that forward.
Yeah,
Other questions?
yeah, I just would like to follow up. In part, I'm hoping that this kind of jumpstarts some of the discussions for next week, and like asking the group what the next initiative is that we should have our eye on. I think these two kind of have a lot of energy around them, and that's why we're focusing on them first. I think I'm going to absolutely reiterate what Brandon said about the potential for funding. There's funding that as partnerships that we can form through the Alliance, that we can take advantage of those, specifically around these two initiatives, but certainly around others as well. And so my hope is that over the next year, that the series of cafes will address all of the initiatives that have come out of the working group over the past, that we visited over the past year, and kind of prioritize each of those and figure out kind of what the next steps are for the Alliance for each of those. Because trying to do them kind of on a quarterly basis, one all at the same time, really is just too much. But so is trying to focus on them in too short a period of time. So that's the general plan, and I don't have the timetable for all of that. That we'll continue to work on that with Brandon, and then also with the Healthy Landscapes team during our quarterly meetings. I hope that helps.
Any other questions, comments, observations? Great. Well, let's dive into our conversation about cooperative weed management areas. I will turn it back over to Patty.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen so that you guys hopefully, can you all see that? Can you see my presentation? Okay, great. I just want to give you an overview about what a cooperative weed management area actually is. There is, and then later on, we're going to provide a little bit of the history. We actually did have a regional CWMA here, and then there are a few other people who have other experiences that they're going to share about kind of, you know, the work that they're doing or have done in the past. So a CWMA, a Cooperative Weed Management Area, hold on, let me get to the right, there we go. It is really just a local or regional partnership that coordinates threats that are posed by invasive species. And typically, you know, it's a CWMAs. Typically, we think of them as weeds, so we're thinking about plants. But, you know, in our region, they could be aquatic animals as well. It could be some kind of insect pest that also may be a threat. So I'm really saying invasive species really broadly in this regard. But what they have in common is that there's some boundary for the area that is defining where that work is taking place, but it does cross jurisdictional boundaries. So it could be, you know, across a county, it could be across a state. So in my head, when I think of this group and I think of a CWMA, I do think of it as the Chicago Wilderness Alliance CWMA. But it could be that there's several groups that together are already doing a lot of this work that could join forces to become the CWA weed management area. So CWMAs share 6 basic characteristics. As I said, they have a defined geographic area. They have a defined and general weed problem or invasive species problem in common. They generally share a climate in common. And then they share some boundary, political or land use. They're generally governed by some kind of a steering committee that oversees the mission that they have and the initiatives that they take, as well as other business. And they represent a broad cross-section of participants. And that can include landowners, natural resource managers, organizations, and municipalities within that boundary of the common geographic area that they share. They generally have some kind of comprehensive plan to address the management of invasive species within their boundaries. And the group itself facilitates the cooperation across all of those partners and coordinates the response to invasive species. And they have a long-term commitment to the partnership that exists that they've created. And, you know, why would we want to form a CWMA? It is exactly because they can cross boundaries. It allows us, if we went the route of creating one, it would allow us to address invasive species across the entire landscape rather than kind of piecemeal as individual organizations and land managers. And coordinated efforts are much more likely to be effective at control. You know, if you are clearing buckthorn off of your particular property, it doesn't really help if your neighbors keep it because, you know, the birds are going to eat the fruits and continue to spread it. So a coordinated effort has a better chance of succeeding long-term. CWMAs also allow participants to leverage their resources. You know, there may be a partner that is really great at writing grants and another partner that has really enthusiastic volunteers and another that has really great educators and communicators that can help spread the word. No one partner is fabulous at doing everything, especially across a really broad landscape. And so together, like the Chicago Wilderness Alliance itself, we can just do a whole lot more if we cooperate in eradicating invasive species. And quite frankly, by forming a formal CWMA, it opens up the opportunity for funding that actually specifically requires the applicant to be a CWMA, or at least is more competitive if the applicant is part of a CWMA. And then there's also the opportunity for early detection and rapid response. You know, if somebody in Cook County or McHenry County notices an early invader and lets, you know, somebody in Lake County know that this is coming, we can together get on it a whole lot faster, and then also have the opportunity to share what activities are actually effective at controlling new invaders that we may not know very much about. So the next couple of slides are just the steps that are kind of in this cookbook to form a CWMA. I'm just going to go through it pretty quickly, and then the link to the cookbook itself, which really beautifully lays out everything in a very nice way how to actually do this. I have that link here, and the slides will be shared, and we'll send that out to all of the participants who registered. So you'll have that link. So a CWMA really needs a champion. We need somebody or a couple of somebodies to really step up and take on the role of, evangelizing, if you will, the formation of a CWMA across our region. And it just is a really important piece that we have somebody or a couple of somebodies really take on this role. We've been talking about this in the Healthy Landscapes team for a while now. And in order to take it from talk to action, we just need help taking it on. Then once we have somebody who is willing to kind of step up, we would work together to determine the geographic boundaries. And from my perspective, we could have an alliance-wide CWMA, or we could have, groups that are already working kind of form more of a cooperative alliance, if you will, just given how broad the geographic area is and the number of organizations there are. We would work to identify potential partners. We certainly want the representation of each major land management agency, which is going to be so critical to the success of this group. We would determine what our common goal or goals might be, and maybe beginning with focusing on one particular species that we just want to get rid of. It could be something like, an add-on to the eradicating buckthorn initiative that we have started in Lake County, or it could be following on from the reports from the Bird Conservation Network about how bad calorie pair is for our grassland and shrubland birds. And that might be the one that we decide that we should focus on for this. Want to select a name, choose a fiscal manager. Now the fiscal manager could be one of the forest preserve or conservation districts that are already running a lot of grants and contracts. It could be a separate 501c3 that's already kind of working, or it may be a brand new entity that forms ultimately out of this initiative. We want to bring together the partners, identify everybody who should be at the table and bring them together. And then from that group, kind of work to establish a steering committee for this group. Select the officers. And then we would want to develop a strong agreement amongst all of the partnerships. Just a memorandum of agreement would work so that we can facilitate the cooperation across all of these jurisdictional boundaries and then get rid of administrative barriers. So one of the things that I can think of that might be an administrative barrier is liability insurance. That one is just a really difficult egg to crack. And if we do it cooperatively, then it becomes a little bit easier. We want to develop a strategic plan. What are we going after? How are we going after it? And then also, every year there's going to be an annual plan to support what that strategic plan is trying to accomplish. How are we actually going to implement that strategic plan kind of across an annual cycle? We might have subcommittees that work on various aspects like grant writing or implementation. Given that there is the potential for funding that's coming down the road, writing a grant to help fund a coordinator for this, once we get kind of a group of people who are interested in seeing this happen, I think is something we absolutely need to do, because this could be such a big effort if we really put ourselves into it. And then finally kind of implement those plans. And when we do have successes, we want to get the word out. that helps, success helps breed success, but also, bringing in more partners, bringing on more people, it will help us get rid of some of those species that are really causing us such issues. So this is my last slide, and I literally took all of this from this cookbook that was developed in the invasivespecies.org, and it really just lays it out really nicely, and we just need to take the opportunity to do it, to make it work. So I'm going to stop sharing and open up the floor. I'm gonna call on Jeff Mengler first, because he was involved with the CWMA that we originally had going several years ago, and he knows the history of how that got formed, and maybe can help us understand a little bit about how to recreate that or create a brand new one.
All right, thanks, Patty. And yeah, I was glad to see that as you went through that cookbook approach to what a CWA needs to be and do, I think we had done most of those things in our first effort. So the good news is we already did it once and it was moderately successful. I'll tell a little bit of this just story of what we did and then where it broke down, why we don't have that group anymore. But it was about 2009, 2010-ish. Like now, we had a lot of discussions going within Chicago Wilderness, and it became apparent this was a priority that had a lot of energy around it. And so what we then decided to call the Northeast Illinois Invasive Plant Partnership, or NIP, which we thought was pretty clever, came into being. We had our own logo. We set up a steering committee. We hired pretty much a full-time coordinator shortly thereafter, as soon as we had enough grant funding in place, and we got lucky. We hired a woman named Kathy McGlynn, who was, in my opinion, overqualified for the position, but she wanted the position and she moved here and did a fabulous job. And, it really came out of discussions within Chicago Wilderness that said, hey, we need exactly these kinds of things that Patty's been talking about, these cross-boundary coordination, reaching out to other maybe non-traditional partners like transportation agencies and railroads and things where we know they're a corridor for invasive species spread. So we reached out to a lot of those groups. And I just wanted to mention, I dug back through my emails to find what I could. The original files that I have had for NIP got lost on an external hard drive that crashed, and they weren't recoverable. But through my emails, just to give you an idea of the folks we'd engaged and the perspectives that they brought, the folks that served on the steering committee included Debbie Maher, who then was with Lake County Forest Preserve. She served as the chair and I was the vice chair. John Legg from the Nature Conservancy, Trish Beckchard, who then was with Midwest Ground Covers, a little bit of a more non-traditional partner, Kurt Dreisilker with the Morton Arboretum, who I think is on the call today. Delaney Strohmeyer from the U.S. Forest Service, and she ended up being a key contact to get us a number of grants. Cindy Hedges from DuPage County Forest Preserve District, Pat Charlebaugh from Sea Grant, Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, Becky Collings, who is now with Cook County Forest Preserves. She probably was with the Field Museum at that time. Dan Larkin with Chicago Botanic Garden, Tricia Bethke from Morton Arboretum. So it just gives you an idea of the breadth of the people that we had engaged on the steering committee. And through that, we secured a number of grants from the U.S. Forest Service, from the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation, from the Illinois Coastal Management Program, from Sea Grant, from others. I wasn't able to dig up kind of all the financial sources that we had at that time. But suffice it to say, it was a fairly active group as long as we had our full-time coordinator out there kind of herding the cats. And we focused on things like clean boats, clean waters, doing a lot of educational outreach to slow the spread of aquatic invasives in our lakes and streams. But we were also engaged in the early detection, rapid response type of thing that Patty mentioned. We did a lot of education events, but also we're trying to stay abreast of the latest science. We were engaged in mapping some of the newer species to our region, and had accomplished quite a bit over, and essentially the group lasted about 5 years. I found that in 2015, we had a 5th anniversary celebration, and there was a presentation that Debbie Maurer gave on everything we've done 5 years in review of NIP. But I don't find that I have her presentation. It would be interesting to find that, because it would probably be a great summary of everything that we had done to that point. But up until that point, the Chicago Botanic Garden had served as our fiscal agent and as our host. So our employee, Kathy McGlynn, sat at a desk at the Botanic Garden, and they handled all of the money for our grants, and they paid Kathy. And essentially what happened was their board of directors decided that providing this service for an outside group was a risk they were no longer willing to take. Despite the best efforts of Bob Kirshner and Greg Mueller on the staff there at CBG, that were our strongest supporters and advocates, CBG decided officially to end being our fiscal agent. And then it happened that at that same time, Kathy McGlynn had to resign as our full-time coordinator. She moved back out east to care for family. And so the double thing of losing your full-time staff and losing your fiscal agent was kind of really what led to the downfall of NIP. After that, we did engage Mia Spade, and she finished up a lot of the grant work that we still had obligations on at that time, and were able to complete those projects. I talked with many institutions searching for a new fiscal agent, and we were willing to not necessarily have, if we hired a new person, have them staffed at the same or housed at the same place that handled our money necessarily. But we talked to Roosevelt University, Loyola University, the Illinois Natural History Survey / University of Illinois, the Morton Arboretum, Chicago Wilderness Trust at that time, Open Lands, the Nature Conservancy, DuPage County Forest Preserve District, and there may have been some others. And unfortunately, there were always kind of those administrative hangups in there, and we were never able to get anything worked out to find that new fiscal agent and that new host. And without that home and without a full-time coordinator, it eventually kind of lost steam. And so that's essentially the history of NIP in a nutshell. But I think we did accomplish quite a bit in those 5 years. And I'd like to think that we could pick that up and get it all going again, and take advantage of the work that we had already accomplished, not reinvent the wheel. The CWA model is out there, and I think we had followed it pretty well. We got a lot of help during our formative time from Chris Evans, who's on the call today, and others who were engaged in other CWMAs. Chris was working down in Southern Illinois with one at that time. And so that helped us get it off the ground, and I think we accomplished quite a bit in 5 years. And so I'll be happy to take any questions.
Well, I'm curious, Jeff, how did you get over the initial kind of activation energy, I guess is the best way to put it, to actually get the group up and going?
Yeah, and we had, there was a lot of energy. There were some huge workshops, with 100, 200 people in a room, and then it kind of distilled down. And so the folks that I named were all serving on a steering committee. And I imagine that really what drove it was Debbie and I served as the champions, and were able to make individual asks of people to help us out with that, and found the right people that could help us out and pull together that steering committee. And we probably got lucky in being able to secure grants right away sufficient to hire Kathy McGlynn.
Right. And you use kind of that energy that you had, that you talked about from those working groups to get that grant money? Was that primarily you and Debbie? Were there others who stepped up to help write those grants?
We had a lot of help from the Chicago Botanic Garden on securing those initial grants. It all, went through them. And as you know, they have people there that do that. That's what they do, is chase those grants professionally. So we were able to lean on that a little bit.
Okay, cool. Any other questions for Jeff? It was a great perspective. Gary, did you have a question?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's the best for Jeff or you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I guess my question is that I'm kind of new to CWMAs a little bit and have some background, did a little bit of research prep for this meeting, but is there a sanctioning body for these cooperative weed management areas, or is it basically the formation of a partnership?
I don't know of a sanctioning body necessarily. I think it really is just the formation of a partnership. I looked for that myself and didn't find that. It just seems like the individual CWMAs that are, at least in our region, and there's some out west and some out east, they're just, it's more or less just forming a partnership and then kind of going through the steps. They have a steering committee, they have some kind of memorandum of understanding, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think that I don't know that there's a sanctioning, but that's a good question, Gary. But I think it makes you eligible for a lot of funds that come through agriculture and may come through the states, because certainly what we learned was that out west, every inch of ground in a lot of western states is covered by one CWMA or another. And the other thing I didn't mention is our boundaries were the Chicago Wilderness part that is in Northeast Illinois. We chose not to include Wisconsin, Indiana, or Michigan, partly because that would have added a level of complexity and geographic spread that would have been more challenging, but partly because they also had other CWAs that were somewhere in their formation, different levels of maturity. And so we were going to see how those played out and just work with them as we were able.
Right. Yeah, I imagine that some of them, and I know that there's one that's a little further south in Illinois, and then there's the Southern Illinois one that Chris is going to talk about in just a minute. So there are some that are kind of in our region that are still operating that I know about, and probably some that I haven't found in my own kind of research that I have been doing too. So Gary, if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to talk to us about the Lake Plain Partnership, and it's not necessarily incorporated, if you will, as strictly as a CWMA, but in a lot of ways it really has a lot of the hallmarks, and it also in a lot of ways functions as one.
Patty,
Yeah,
there are
kind of
two
exactly
questions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry, Gary. There are two questions in the chat, and one is from Hannah, and she asked if maybe it's too in the weeds for this, but wondering if you could share any of the EDRR weeds you worked on during the 5 years and how their status has evolved today. And then there's a follow-up from Casey Sullivan below that says, could a fiscal agent be created with a legal charter and an oversight body? And if this is not the time to answer these, I just wanted to raise those.
Jeff,
Yeah,
you'll probably have
so-
to take the first one.
Yeah, I was trying to think of some of the things. I know we did some projects regarding flowering rush, although I don't know that that was really a new invader. There was a project involving mapping Japanese knotweed population, as that was fairly new at that time. And that whole the mapping, I'm blanking on what it's called, but the mapping, online mapping thing that's hosted at University of Georgia was just coming online then. So we were trying to figure out ways to plug into that. And on the other question, we looked at different mechanisms, different forms of agreements that we could use to have other organizations serve as our fiscal agent. We also looked into incorporating as a 501c3 ourselves. We had not done that to that point, but the advice from accountants and lawyers at that time was that it was going to be too big of a lift for what we had in NIP. If we'd have done it 10 or 15 years earlier, when getting your 501c3 was not as big of a lift, we would have done it. I was and still am involved in another nonprofit that easily got our 501c3, but we did it back in the late 90s when it was a lot easier to do than it is today. So those were all things that we looked into. And as I dig back in my emails, I can probably start to pull together a little more information on some of the projects that we worked on and some of the species that we focused on at that time.
Great. And then there's a comment from Jim Anderson.
Yeah, good comment from Jim.
Yeah, that's a really good comment, that CWMAs are recognized by the U.S. Forest Service, which would also provide funding. And again, given all the federal funds that are, kind of just poised to be available in the near future, forming one and getting this up and going as soon as we can gives us the opportunity to apply for funds like that. At this point too, and I think this probably wasn't something that was around when NIP was formed, Jeff, a lot of the forest preserves and other, kind of regional conservation partners have friends groups that are fiscal agents that could maybe be tapped into to act as the fiscal agent for a group like this. So I think that there are places that we can turn to that might be a little bit more sustainable than it turned out CBG ended up being. So.
Right, agreed. And just maybe a lead in to get back to Gary. Because in looking at some of these old documents we had, so at our 5th annual meeting, which was in November of 2015 at the Morton Arboretum, one of our 2015 projects that we got a report on was the Lake Michigan Strike Team.
And one quick thing, I'm going to jump out there. I'm going to encourage folks to continue putting questions in the chat, but keeping an eye on the time and wanting to make sure that we get through our many speakers today. Perhaps we can answer some of the questions in the chat too as we move through. We want to make sure we have enough time for everyone.
Gary, I guess you're up next.
All right, I was kind of waiting for a cue. So hi, I'm Gary Glowacki with the Lake County Forest Preserves. I'm the manager of conservation ecology. And one of the things I spend quite a bit of my time on is, I guess, coordinating what we call the Lake Plain Partnership. And the Lake Plain Partnership, actually the Chilwaukee Prairie Illinois Beach Lake Plain Partnership. It's a group of 14 different local regional entities, primarily landowners in this Lake Plain geography, that have cooperatively worked together to advance not just weed management or control of invasive species, but address many other issues, the hydrology, water quality, those kind of things. But largely what we do as land management agency is manage weeds. So in a lot of ways, we do function as a cooperative weed management area. And we've kind of assembled around grants, and our primary funding source, we've gotten Chicago Wilderness grants, C2000 grants in the past, but these days we're largely funded by a private foundation, and then also through GLRI, Sustain Our Great Lakes funding. And we've used those funds pretty effectively to leverage local resources and expand that through things like the Lake Plain Strike Team. So one of the kind of innovative strategies we have is we have a contractor that is able to control invasive plants across the entirety of the Lake Plain. And the Lake Plain is made up of several different small and large natural areas. The biggest landowners are the state of Wisconsin for Chilwaukee Prairie State Natural Area. University of Wisconsin Parkside owns some property. The Chilwaukee Prairie Preservation Fund. The Village of Pleasant Prairie kind of own parcels within the Wisconsin side. On the Illinois side, the Lake County Forest Preserve owns some of the property. Zion Park District, Winthrop Harbor Park District, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, and then some of the large industrial sites have also kind of agreed to be partners on this kind of Lake Plain partnership. So we've kind of formed in 2009, 2010, kind of the similar timeline that Jeff mentioned, and pretty happy to say we're still going pretty strong. And it's primarily because we have had success in getting funding, I think we've raised about $7 million over the last 10 years of federal funds, private local funds, and private foundation funding. So we've been able to do a lot of great work. And from hearing what Patty has talked about, what Jeff has talked about, the big differences I see between these cooperative weed management areas and the Lake Plain Partnership is the formation of a steering committee. So we actually don't have a formal steering committee, but all partners on the group, we meet regularly, we just discuss these things, but we don't have like a formal process to vote on things, adopt, you know, official management plans, but we're in constant communication and generally work pretty well together. Outside of that, it seems pretty similar in how we function and how we operate. We've actually been working with the Conservation Fund. We got a small grant from the Coastal Management Program and then the private foundation to look at the feasibility of kind of more formalizing this partnership, looking at it becoming a national wildlife refuge. Actually forming a 501c3, because the Forest Preserve District has been, or the Preservation Foundation of the Forest Preserve District has been acting as the fiscal agent and driving a lot of that work. And what kind of Jeff brought up, you know, kind of losing that fiscal agent or some of the champions can have, you know, profound effect on the future of some of these groups, whether you call it a cooperative weed management area or some other partnership. You know, having that long-term fiscal agent in place, having those champions or a successor for those champions in place, and it seems without that, you can have some struggle. So I'm really interested in what Chris is going to say about some of the differences he sees in these Lake Plain partnerships and maybe the other cooperative weed management area in this area and how some of the ones further south have been able to sustain themselves for longer. Is it, you know, essentially as simple as maintaining that fiscal agent and some of those champions to drive that work forward, or is it's something different? So that's about all I have. Happy to answer any questions. It's been, you know, a very rewarding experience, and you know, all the partners we work with have been fantastic. We've been able to do some great work, and pretty proud of what we've been able to achieve over the last 10+ years.
And also, it will be one of the 4 Chicago Wilderness Alliance field trips this summer. More on that to come through the newsletter.
Could I quickly add for Mark Johnson here? I just put in the chat. He is working with the hub, and there's 2 different things that you can connect with to share your restoration work. He would love to be able to get some of those layers and track them. And then also there's a means to actually document where you're doing specific work. And so I put his information in the chat and the hub, and his email is in there. So I see he's back on, but he might be on another meeting. But I just want to make mention of this. If you've not looked at this, please take a look at this for tracking information. This is really a good site, and it's really easy to interface with, and I highly encourage everybody using it. So thank you.
Cool. Thanks. Well, Gary, I think you gave Chris the kind of perfect setup. Really appreciate that. So Chris, take it away.
All righty, definitely. Let me share my screen. I've got a couple visuals just so people don't have to look at me. And to go back to what Gary was asking about and saying how the organizations, the cooperative weed management areas that I've been involved in differ from what you're doing, I think there's more similarities than differences, honestly. A lot of the funding sources, a lot of the basic ideas of projects, the approaches are all the same. So that's why I think you're so successful, these are so successful, you know, it's basically built on those good partnerships. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the River to River Cooperative Weed Management Area. And so this is a CWMA that's been involved I've been involved in for a long time, and it was organized in 2006, and it's still active and going today. It's had a full-time coordinator the entire time, and cycled through about 4 of them, you know, as they move on to other jobs. And I had the privilege of being the full-time coordinator of the CWMA for its first 5 years. And so the neat thing that I've watched, because I've been on the steering committee ever since I left, is just the evolution over time of the projects and the approaches. And this cooperative weed management area really started with just the basic of raising everybody's awareness of invasive species, because that was the biggest need at first, and then kind of moved into addressing public land issues, and then now has really moved more towards kind of how to deal with invasives on private lands in this area. And so it's really been a neat evolution, if you will, of kind of how to address invasive species or what are the most pressing needs. The other thing that I think has been really critical to the success of River to River was that we worked really hard to have shovel-ready projects ahead of time and just kind of on the shelf proposals on the shelf ready to go, because when we did have a funding opportunity, we were ready to take advantage of it. And I think that's one of the big things that allowed us to really get the funding we needed. And speaking of this one, kind of in that early 2000s, there was several things that really led to a ton of cooperative weed management areas being formed in the East. And one of them really was the idea of some funding availability. That was when the Pulling Together initiative from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation really put out specific funds for cooperative weed management areas. And so you kind of had to be a cooperative weed management area to really compete for that pot of funds, as well as the Forest Service, particularly the Forest Service in the East, had monies and wanted to give them out, but it was kind of a requirement that you needed to be in a partnership like a CWMA to get in there. And then a couple of years later, the GLRI really pushed funding to start cooperative weed management areas. And so I see that like 5 or 6 year period there in the early 2000s where there was just a ton of CWMAs being formed. And I kind of see some of the same things happening right now with all these funds being available. I could see that it's another time for other partnerships to form to take advantage of the available funding. But just with the CWMA, we actually didn't have that many partners. We had a lot of state and federal partners, but down here in far southern Illinois, we didn't have a lot of county municipalities or park districts or anything. So we had a relatively small group of partners, but it was made up of the major federal agencies and state agencies, as well as organizations in the region that works on invasives. And then our coverage area is far southern Illinois, which is actually a pretty big coverage area for CWMA. I mean, we had 11, 12 counties covered there, which is a little bigger than some other CWMAs, which is often 1 or 2 counties. But we shared a lot of ecology, a lot of land ownership kind of fell into this, where there was the whole purchase boundary of the Shawnee National Forest. We had a couple of national wildlife refuges. It was a region for NRCS and a region alone for DNR. So it made sense to go this big. And again, we really had a ton of state and federal land, which is why we did a lot of work on there first. I think we were somewhere around 500,000 acres of public land in this region. And then our funding sources to start out with were groups like the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation with PTI, and we matched that with the old C2000 funds. But then we had a ton of funding from Northeastern Area State and Private Forestry, National Forest Foundation, and a lot of others. And really going out and seeking funds to get projects done was some of the major work of our organization initially, to kind of build that backbone so we could do the projects we wanted to do. And then again, we did a lot of kind of interesting things, I think, including a stiltgrass summit where we really wanted to address that species. I think we had 9 or 10 different states show up at this and really kind of brought it to the forefront in the region of species to deal with. We did a whole lot with kids in elementary schools in that initial kind of education awareness phase. Here's a bunch of kids pulling garlic mustard. And then we also we were integral, the CWMA was integral to the formation of the Southern Illinois Invasive Species Strike Team, which was operated by the Nature Conservancy, but it was integral to the strike team. And that's been in place since about 2008 or 2009. And they, as you know, the strike teams are cross boundaries. This group had a chance to work on state, federal, and private lands, deal with invasive species, kind of with a focus a lot on early detection. It's been neat to see it because it's still going today. It's going strong. It's actually increased now, 5 or 6 folks working on it, and they've kind of morphed not just into invasive species, but now doing fire and other forest management activities as well. But it's really been a way of getting on boots on the ground and getting work done kind of across boundaries for the CWMA. And then speaking of that evolution, at kind of the last few years, to figure out how really to address invasive species on public or on private land, they formed a separate project kind of under the CWMA called the FRST, Forest Restoration Support Team. And this is a partnership of private landowners that get together and help each other control invasive species on their land. So they kind of sign up. It's like a burn association or a burn alliance. And then there's volunteer days that move around from private landowner to private landowner. And then the CWMA provides training and equipment to help these landowners help each other. It's really a neat project and a neat way that I see this CWMA itself kind of moving forward as it goes. And then just kind of lastly, just one last slide to show, there was a question about EDRR, and one of the kind of things that this CWMA hangs its hat on is it has been able to do some successful eradication. We actually found a small stand of a Brazilian Alodia in a local lake here in Southern Illinois. It's the only known location in all of Southern Illinois. And it was so fascinating to see everybody out there working together. We had researchers from different universities mapping these invasive species. We had different groups out there surveying for them and other people spraying. And so it really, over a matter of a couple of years and so many hours of volunteerism from the different agencies, we were able to eradicate this invasive from this lake, and we haven't found it back yet. And so that's kind of one of those successes. And so I'll just end just little bit about it here, just saying that one of the examples I use a lot of that, how this is such a neat partnership, is the fact that when I was the coordinator, my office was in a Fish and Wildlife Service building. The truck I drove was a DNR truck. The funds that I was paid with was Forest Service funds. The people I answered to and the fiscal agent was the local RC&D, and the other folks employed were the Nature Conservancy. So really it was a jumble of partnerships, everybody contributing, which I think really helped lead to its success. And so I just wanted to kind of give a brief overview of that while we were here, and I'm happy to answer questions and definitely take part in a lot of the discussions. One of the things that I think, just one other thing before I go, is to talk about kind of why we were successful. And I think it was because we addressed all of our partnerships needs through kind of a portfolio of projects, in the sense that each project we did may not have interested all of our partners, but if you look at our whole entire portfolio, all the projects we did, we made sure that we had a project or something we did that met the needs or addressed the needs of one of our partners, at least one of our partners. So collectively, everybody was getting to eat, if you will, right? Everybody was getting some of their needs met and getting involved. And that was done very strategically from the first to make sure that all partners stayed engaged and saw the value of the CWMA.
Thank you, Chris. That's really great. I find it actually completely interesting that you didn't necessarily have a fiscal agent there. It was kind of, the funding was kind of jumbled together, which is maybe a little messy, but it worked clearly in your area, which is really great. We really do kind of need to move on to our next topic, but I was really happy to see the strike team that you were talking about with pictures of prescribed burning, because that is our next topic. It's kind of a great segue. And of course, prescribed burning really is such a great tool to help combat invasive species. There's lots and lots of evidence out there that shows that, short burn return intervals really do lead to lower diversity, if you will, and cover of invasive species. And so being able to make sure that we can apply fire broadly across our region is just so important. And I would like to have John McCabe from Forest Preserves of Cook County and also the Illinois Fire Council to talk for a little bit about kind of his efforts to kind of keep this all going. And of particular interest for this group is we're really going to focus on training needs across the region and how we can collectively address those training needs so that we can keep prescribed burning going on all of our landscapes.
Patty, before we move on to prescribed burns,
Yes.
I would love to hear any perspective Amy Dahl has from the CWMA piece.
Sorry.
No worries. Amy, please take it away.
I will keep it very short and brief, but I'm really excited to hear about the possibility of a CWMA. And actually, Friends of Illinois Nature Preserves, we have a couple of new staff that are also on this call, and we will meet after this. And I just told them, put on your agenda today, let's talk about what the Friends role is with CWMA in the region. Oh, Patty, you're nodding your head too vigorously. It makes me nervous.
Oh, no. That's why I was interested in having you kind of join us today, because I know that the Friends is involved in a CWMA that's a little further south than the Chicago Wilderness area. And so, you know, if there's perspectives that can be shared, et cetera, at some point, that would be great.
And when we've worked in Southern Illinois, and Chris and I have met, but you know, our field staff in Southern Illinois was that it was a great partnership to jump into. And as many of you know on this Zoom call, that nature preserves cross so many jurisdictional and bureaucratic boundaries that there are public landowners, there are private landowners, and government entities, land trusts, and we have the opportunity to work with all of them and build volunteer and staff partnerships throughout that. And I think a CWMA makes so much sense in also being part of that jurisdictional overlap. And we know that invasive species are not just stopping at the boundaries of a nature preserve. And we also know from talking with partners and landowners and data and research that the threats to our nature preserves, to our remnant, you know, natural heritage it's not preservation. That's one of the threats, but the biggest threat facing them is invasive species and just ecological degradation. And so I'm excited that we're going to talk about prescribed fire next. I think these are such complementary pieces, and I think our volunteer communities in partnership with staff at landowning agencies and other ecological agencies is such a valuable partnership in this. And so we'll definitely stay connected, but I think this is such a great initiative on both fronts.
So then I guess that does at this point lead us to you, John.
Thanks, Patty. Hello to everybody. I know I see a lot of friendly faces that I haven't seen in a long time. And quick shout out to my staff who's on the meeting. Wonderful to see everybody here. A lot of folks interested in fire. In my role as the director of the Department of Resource Management here at the Forest Preserves of Cook County, and then as the president of the Illinois Prescribed Fire Council, one of my main responsibilities is getting more fire on the ground. So we're certainly trying to figure ways out to do that. And that's one of the reasons I'm here today. Before I jump into the training conversation, I just wanted to touch base real quick on the Chicago Wilderness Protection Plan, Preparedness Plan, or whatever, I'm sorry, Community Wildfire Preparedness Plan. Too many acronyms that I got to remember. That is due for a revision as of August 2023. It will be out of date. And so we started the wheels turning on this late last year, and we have engaged the two previous authors, Steve Creech and Leslie Burns, who are interested in coming back for the revision. So that's pretty cool. We actually have a meeting scheduled tomorrow, and Patty's involved in that, where we're going to be talking about the administrative piece to be able to get that done. That plan is tied to the 6 counties in and around, right here around Cook County, Lake County, Will, McHenry, Kane, and DuPage. That's what the original plan was created around, was those 6 counties. We had talked in that earlier meeting, the Healthy Habitats meeting, about potentially adding on additional counties. That's going to have to wait until after this revision is done, because that's a much heavier lift to add a whole county on, or multiple counties. So we have plenty of work to do. I mean, I'm hearing all this stuff going on here and how we have all these ideas and things to do. So just throwing this one out there as well. So in the short term, we're going to, this wagon is already rolling on the revision, but we're going to be engaging with folks from those communities to be able to get that done. I've already talked to a lot of people that were involved in the initial creation of that document, but that document is important from that grant funding side of things. So just like you were talking about on the weed management side, we need to have this document up to date and ready to go so we can qualify for a lot of this money that's coming out of the federal government, millions and billions of dollars, really. And I know all of our agencies have a need for that. And so maybe we could look at other partnerships to be able to extend that footprint a little bit if folks do not have a CWPP in their particular region that would allow them to apply for that funding. So we're open to trying to figure that piece out, as we go down the road here. But the first thing is we got to get this document revised. On the training side of things, one of the things that we've struggled with here over the years is advanced burn training, especially on the federal side, because we didn't have easy access to it. It's certainly gotten a lot better with stuff being online and then people being able to bring other people in from time to time. But I know over the years, there's been a lot of conversation around creating a more local CW type burn training for crew bosses / burn bosses, similar to what a group of people did back in the early 2000s that created the Chicago Wilderness Midwest Ecological Prescription Burn Crew Member Training. That class, which is sort of modeled after the S-130-190, is only recognized here locally amongst most of the land management agencies in the area. But I feel strongly about it, that we need a training that's designed like that training for this area, for that higher level folks. The Certified Prescribed Burn Manager program has been great. And I know anybody who has any responsibility for putting fire on the ground believes in that program. But there's a real big gap in there between actually having training and experience and then actually earning that certification. I think most land management agencies address that issue by doing their own training, right? Which is not a bad thing. And everybody that I know in this business, because they recognize the risk that's associated with it, and that every agency is one burn away from shutting their program down, recognizes the importance of that. So it's a matter of pulling these organizations together and creating a standardized training that will still allow for flexibility like we have now, even with the CW crew member training that we have. Some agencies allow people to be hired into their natural resources team without any training. Our agency does not allow that, or at least it didn't. It will be allowing that with a new position we're adding. But we require people to have that training, that certification, walking in the door. Even then, you're still not giving them the drip torch and sending them out to burn, 100 acres somewhere, right? So it's just developing that standardized training that the land management agencies around here would recognize. That would be helpful, especially with folks maybe moving between agencies, or if they, want to move on someplace else. So there's been a lot of work and a lot of thought around this for a number of years. And I really feel like we got to pull this together and get this thing done, because this is creating issues for us as it relates to getting more people that could be burn bosses, which is a very difficult job, but yet a very important one that we need to get done. So those are the two things I was asked to cover today. I'm certainly going to stay on the meeting, and I'm happy to answer any questions and talk. Anybody who knows me, I can talk for hours about fire. So I'll be able to chime in with stuff that other people I know are going to talk about.
So some of the things that you mentioned, John, really, I think are important to a particular discussion that we've been having in my agency. And that is the CW training that is available already and is recognized already. You know, Lake County certainly recognizes it. We allow people who to be crew members if they've gone through that training. We're opening up to have volunteers who also have that training be members of some smaller burns. But I'm going to turn now to Kelly Schultz, because we do have something of an issue in terms of being able to offer that training, maybe more broadly, certainly more often. So I'm going to let you take it away, Kelly.
Thanks, Patty. So hi, everybody. I'm Kelly Schultz with Lake County Forest Preserves, and I work with volunteers in our restoration program. And as Patty alluded to, we are trying to expand opportunities for volunteers to burn with us. And like most of the agencies, we're having a lot of folks who've retired out in the last 5 years. We've lost a lot of burn bosses. We've lost a lot of experience, and we're looking to elevate that next generation. So Leslie Burns, who was mentioned as very engaged still with our community, is our trainer still, which we love. But I'd like a better legacy plan than hiring back retirees to continue doing our trainings for us. So one of the questions I have for this Healthy Landscapes Committee is, how do we go about getting new trainers? I've asked a bunch of folks, and a lot of people say, yeah, that's a good question. I've been doing this for 20 years, and honestly, I don't remember how we picked these personnel to be certified as trainers. I did have one person who said, hey, we designed this program to be accessible to anyone. Anyone can teach this class who is willing to spend the time. And it is time. It's a full 2-day course. So I'd love to hear from the committee if we have a consensus on who is eligible to be a trainer. Is it anybody, or is it X amount of burn years, or what is our regional standard that we all recognize as who is qualified to train for all of us? And part 2 of that question is, how do we get them? How do we train the trainer? Is it enough to co-teach with somebody like Leslie who has experience? Do we need to do a formal train the trainer session? And if so, who is eligible to do that? And do they have time to do that in the near future? Because again, we've got volunteers and staff, a lot of folks we'd like to get certified. And ideally, we'd love to see more trainers around the region so we could trade off, and maybe Lake County hosts in 23, McHenry 24, Cook in 25, or different seasons to kind of offset the time commitment for training. So if anyone has thoughts on that and wants to jump in, I'd love to hear it.
So Kelly, this is Jim Anderson. Are you saying you want training for the Midwest Ecological Prescription Burning training?
Yes, I want our next
Okay.
Leslie Burns who can run the class for us. And
Okay,
it could be.
Well, I let you know that McHenry County is currently offering that course, and so is the Arboretum, the Morton Arboretum. So those classes have gone on every year. I think we just need to do a better job of communicating when they're there. But I'm also very sensitive to your idea of getting more trainers. And I think, John's got his hand up. He probably can answer that question.
Well, I would just build on what Jim said. Yeah, I mean, I know where you're coming from, Kelly. Like, we've been teaching the class at the Arboretum, and as one of the lead instructors for the last, 20 something years on that class, we used to bounce around when CW was sort of managing the program. We would teach it all over the place. I've taught it up in Lake County many times, all over McHenry, all the way far south, you name it. When the Arboretum took it over, they wanted to host it at the Arboretum because it was, it's a great place and it's easy for them to manage things that way. So I don't think there's any, suggestion that you couldn't be teaching the class in other locations. When you talk about like who can teach the class, I mean, and we want the class to be accessible. There's no doubt about that. You just got to think about the risk and liability, whoever that instructor is, right? You don't want somebody teaching that if you end up with a mistake, everybody's going to be brought into court, and, how could you recognize this person as a teacher? So that was something that we talked with the Arboretum about, who sort of took ownership of the program, was trying to drill down to figure out what made sense from that standpoint, right? On what were those qualifications for somebody to be able to teach that class. And, we haven't dotted those I's and crossed those T's yet. McHenry County, the class they teach is a one-day thing. We don't recognize that class. I'm not saying it's not a good class and it works for them. That's fine. But having looked at what they had taken out of the class, we don't recognize the 1 day. So I suggest, you look at that if you want to, as from your agency's perspective. But yeah, there's an opportunity to be able to get additional instructors from organizations. I know even though you've lost some people, you still have some good people in Lake County. I mean, Dave Kaysen has the experience from a background standpoint to be able to teach that class with his eyes closed, so there are people out there like that where you could be teaching your staff. I mean, I've got staff that work for me where we do internal trainings with some of our partner groups like Green Corps Chicago and our Conservation Corps. For them, it's not easy to get to the Arboretum or pay the fee there. So we teach it internally ourselves as well. So those options exist. So I'm happy to work with anybody on that to figure some of those things out a little bit better, or at least I want to be part of that conversation, or I'd like to be.
That'd be great, John. I mean, because yeah, Dave would be on my short list. Matt, we've got a bunch of people who've been burning for years, who are burn bosses, who really know their stuff. Some of them have co-taught with Leslie. I just want to make sure that what we're training our people is going to be recognized around the region. So we're handing out a certificate that everyone else feels confident in that class as well. I mean, certainly, like you guys have said, this is member, not burn boss, but I still feel this is a really important class, better than 130, 190.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. And while we put all of our people through to 130, 190, anybody that comes to us at 130, 190, we put them through the CW class. And I agree 100% that is much more valid for the work we're doing. No offense to the 130, 190.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, if you're going to go through, and this is kind of the issue in part, if you're going to go through the career trajectory to go from crew member to crew boss and then to burn boss, you do have to have those federally recognized courses. And of course, a lot of that information is really critical if there's a fire gets away or something along those lines. But I agree, the CW training is really far more applicable to the work that we're trying to actually accomplish. So it is, but there's, I think, more demand than opportunity, and even for the kind of intro training that the CW has in place now. And I have to give a shout out to Jackie Barrow, because she's really taken on the yeoman's task of trying to kind of create that opportunity for that pipeline. And I would invite you to kind of give a little bit of your perspective about how that's going and some of the challenges that you've had to face. I know you've given the intro 130, 190 multiple times over the past couple of years. And then you've also taken the opportunity to create some of the opportunities for people to take the more advanced training. So what are some of the limitations and opportunities that you've kind of found along the way?
Yeah, so I'm Jackie Bureau. I'm with McHenry County Conservation District, a stewardship ecologist. So I work with the natural resources volunteer programs. I did want to throw out a note to the Chicago Wilderness Training. Would love to have a conversation with you, John, and you, Kelly, about what is that process for standardizing and training the trainer? I know in the stewardship working group, we had conversations about that with other trainings and created a process like, do they need to have a certain certification, the Illinois Prescribed Burn Manager? Do they need the federal, and how many years of experience? And so I think that's what we're kind of looking for to make it more available and be able to teach it in-house. The other thing that we didn't know at least when I started working at McHenry County 4 years ago, we didn't necessarily know there was a difference between the trainings offered at the Arboretum. And then we had a conversation about what are the differences and went through all the PowerPoints and, working out of the same manual and everything. And so I think that's probably a conversation that needs to continue to say, we want to make sure everything is standardized. How do we do that? With the recognition of, we inherited the program So it's, to my knowledge, been done that way since the inception of, adopting the original manual. So we're happy to work together to figure that out. We just need to have the conversation. So as far as the other trainings, the past couple of years, we have partnered with the Illinois Fire Service Institute, which is out of the University of Illinois Extension, and they have all the qualifications to teach the federal NWCG courses. So we looked into how do you certify someone to be able to teach those courses? And at the time, at least, we didn't have anybody who was able to dot all the I's and cross their T's for the federal certification. So it was easier to bring in somebody who could. I think I took a class with Tom Richter and got introduced to him that way. But after that, we decided this really makes sense. Most of our entry-level people, we don't necessarily require that they have burn training, but they have to get it within a year, either the Chicago Wilderness or the S-130-190 to participate on burn crews. And if they are going for more advanced certifications or, an ecologist position, they need to have the S-130 minimum and any additional burn boss certifications or Illinois prescribed burn manager. So as we were doing this, we were focusing more on college students and people who are interested in natural resources as a career, but didn't necessarily have access to trainings. We found some really great opportunities for people at a couple of programs like Southern Illinois, Stevens Point, and it was just hard to find something local. And when you did find something local, there weren't a lot of spots available, or it would fill up super quickly. So when we first set up the S-130 class with IFSI, it was, can we host this locally? Can our volunteers come? And how do we make sure people have a couple of advanced trainings? So we tested it out with just S-130 field day, having people take the class online for the most part. It's great that it's available in the online portal for 4 out of the 5 days. And then they complete the last field day with us. It did take a little bit of hammering out of details with U of I legal to get the liability insurance in particular to match. They have a very particular format to their contract. And so what we did was we are offering the space and my time free of charge, essentially. They are coming in and teaching the class. We talked about it as a perk for volunteers initially, but anybody from the public could attend. And they handle all payment. So they're in charge of the liability of screening participants, making sure that fire chief signature is somebody appropriate, that whoever's signing off on that, their insurance, all that is covered. So we are just providing the space and doing it as a partnership. So I'm present for the class to help them with, the room and getting people situated. And then it's also an opportunity for us to plug our programs. So it's good that way. One change we made too was to allow people, they don't have to be a registered volunteer to participate on our burn crews. We have 2 options. So either they register as a volunteer and they've done the Chicago Wilderness training, which we've always done, or they can have the S-130-190 completed, and then they can send that to me separately and be on our burn list. So they still have a waiver they sign on our sign-in sheet, and no volunteers are leading any crews. Volunteers are just participating. So there's always staff, plenty of staff available to do the leading, even of just the separate crew lines. So in the more recent years, we've started adding, in addition to S-130 field day, 1 advanced burn training. So this year we've added our X301, the prescribed fire implementation class. And so selfishly, I asked our ecologists, what do we need? And that's what they said. So that's what I asked IFSI if they hosted, and they do. So the thing is, we don't have enough people to attend the class. They have a minimum of 15 participants. So we advertise to all of you so that hopefully we can fill the class. We've had no problem with that. And that's been a really good partnership because it's getting many people trained. We're all kind of pulling from the same applicant pool, so to speak, in the region. And we need it anyways. So it gives us a legit reason to offer the training. So far it's been working pretty well.
So I have a question for you. How when you've opened it up to kind of the general, a more general audience, not just your volunteers or staff, have you had more demand than you've had spaces in your class?
It's been pretty close. Usually we have no problem filling the class. When we have gone over and had a wait list, Tom Richter was willing to admit the additional couple of people. So we usually don't advertise it for more than maybe a month or two. And then depending on how enrollment is doing, I'll send another announcement or not.
Okay, that really, that helps me kind of understand. If
And they
there's
have
more-
a maximum of 32 people usually per class that IFSI does.
Okay. And John, I don't know what kind of opportunities that you are kind of making available either to your staff or other people. I don't know if you're, bringing just in-house training for some of the more basic stuff for your staff. And actually, I'm going to open this up to anybody. We've got maybe 5-10 minutes where we can continue talking about training specifically, and then we'll have to move on to kind of our next topic on fire.
Well, I mean, I would say that certainly I'm open to, any kind of partnership to get more training done. And we've done this over the years where we've hosted field days for the 130, 190. So, Jackie's point about having folks do things online, which is generally what we're doing, even with our staff, and then trying to connect people to field days, unless we had a bigger group. So if there's more of a demand for that, that's certainly something we'd be open to, partnering again on. And whether, with our spread county-wise, we do it north, we do it south, we're getting a whole bunch of different people from all the different organizations that are here. So we're certainly open to those types of things. And again, the CW, the crew member training, I mean, we definitely want to do, we don't want obstacles, right? I mean, and these sound like easy ones for us to figure out. So I'm really happy with the work Jackie's done. I get I see all of her emails, so there's definitely good communication there as far as reaching out to people. That's the kind of stuff that we need. It's all of this stuff. And in my role with the Fire Council now, where I'm on some of these national meetings, you would be shocked at the amount of work that gets done by small groups of people to have these big successes that are occurring. It's incredible. So the work that's happening here that I'm hearing from, individual organizations is critical to the success of us as one big giant group, And so we definitely want to keep that up and work together on that. So I appreciate you asking me to be here today and hearing about some of these things. I've already made a connection. Kelly and I are going to talk tomorrow or Thursday afternoon. I'll follow up with Jackie too. We definitely want to keep those communication lines open and, make sure we're working together on that stuff.
That's really great, because I actually, that was one of the things that I was going to be talking about as a takeaway, is that we need to have that smaller group to talk about specifically who can train, what their qualifications have to be, how we figure that out. Because I agree that should be pretty straightforward. And then I guess, the other thing is, I love the idea of a follow-on, more advanced training that we could make available. And again, I think that's probably more of a follow-on conversation. Never occurred to me that might actually even be a possibility, that we could do it, locally, kind of as a follow-on to our own training, as opposed to doing something like the Fire Service Institute and, you know, bringing them in or however that ends up. So I appreciate that perspective, John.
I also think that we should think about what do you need as agencies to get your burn bosses certified now? And, you know, in previous times, we received funding to actually put those courses on for everybody in the region. And you know, it took 2 years to go through the required courses for being a burn boss, but we got it done. And so I would be interested in seeing, you know, if John or Kelly or someone could put together what those courses are, and we might be able to find funding for it and get it done now, and then start that process of, you know, John mentioned maybe we do our own training for burn bosses. We just have to be cautious that I think we try to stay in touch with the IDNR and how they've done the Illinois Prescribed Fire Act. And so I just think we need to be mindful that I don't think there's going to be a lot of difficulty. The Illinois Prescribed Fire Act is pretty straightforward. So I think if we could get like an idea of what those classes are that we need to create more burn bosses, both on the staff and, you know, if we want to try to encourage some volunteers, I think that's another thing that we should be thinking about.
Right. Yeah, I mean, for Lake County, you know, basically to be a burn boss, the minimum is the same as the Illinois requirement to be a burn boss, which is relatively minimal, but still for folks, it's hard to get. Given the patchwork of courses that are available, it's hard to get in any sequence the specific classes that they need. And of course, they also then need to have somebody mentor them, you know, on a number of burns. And my biggest concern at this point is that they're not going to get the coursework in time before, you know, some of the burn bosses, the really experienced burn bosses that are around, before they start to either move to other agencies or start to retire too. So it's kind of a structural problem. John, you have your hand up again.
Yeah, I just want to, Jim mentioned the staff and volunteers. Let's not forget the contractors. That's a huge thing for us too, that we need. They've had the same sort of, I don't want to die off, maybe isn't the right word, but people moving on to other things or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Jim, you raise a good point. Certainly want to be mindful that DNR is the sort of, overseer for the state. We definitely want to check those boxes. But I do think whether we end up with the NWCG, which is, there's funding out there, it's a heavy lift. It's complicated, like you said, Patty, making sure you got the right line. Somebody misses one of those courses and then they're, off the radar. We create something local, it's sort of that third party validation of what we're doing. And so I think that's why that'll be easier for us in the long run. In the short term, though, it's definitely going to be a little bit more work.
Thanks, John.
John, while you have the floor, there's a question in the chat that is directed toward you in Cook County.
Is it the one about the field day training count as burn boss certification? No, it would not, because the field training that's required for that is very specific about, again, sort of like Patty said, I mean, it's very rigid about, you got to check these particular boxes on knowing how to do certain tools, pumps, get under your fire shelter, all that kind of stuff. So it's a specific thing. You could look at the U of I Fire Science webpage or the Illinois Prescribed Fire webpage, and under the resources tabs, we'll list the state available field training days where you can schedule somebody, or, they got them throughout the state, so you can find something nearby.
Thank you. It definitely seems like this is a larger conversation, and, maybe this group can make, a document or something available and send it out in an email blast to the participants on the call too, so that it's just a little bit more immediate. And for the last portion of our time together today, I'm going to invite Dave Holman to pop up and talk to us about his mapping efforts. for our prescribed burning programs kind of across the region. And he works with the Illinois Prescribed Fire Council to map, as much as of our prescribed burning as possible. And before you start, Dave, I'm gonna say that I'm gonna echo what Jim said about the CW hub that's available. One of the reasons why I would like Dave to kind of show us what he's doing is because I think that there's a real opportunity for the mapping that he's involved with to kind of go through the hub or integrate with the hub to make it just a more one-stop shopping for those of us who are providing data. But I want to have Dave kind of show you what he does because I think it's pretty amazing. So thank you, Dave, for being here today.
Of course, Patty, and I'll speak to that as well. And to Jim's point earlier, Mark asked me to mention this. For those of you on this call who do restoration work, be it prescribed burns or other types of work, clearing invasive weeds, etc., there are two ways that you can upload data to the hub that Mark and Jim have set up, and I just put those into the chat. The first one, you can use that if you have an actual data set. If you're a GIS user like myself, you go there, you can upload that. It'll go straight to Mark. The second one allows you to map out individual sites. Again, that's if you just want to, if you might not have a shapefile or a geodatabase, you can just go in there and trace it out, push submit, and it'll go straight to Mark Johnston. So I'm going to talk just a little bit, very briefly. Any of you who know me know that I'm not fond of the sound of my own voice, about the mapping work that we've been doing with the Illinois Prescribed Fire Council. And that's something that I'm indebted to John McCabe for leading. Now, we've mapped, or we try to map all the prescribed burns in the state. Do I have control? Can I do a screen?
You should be able to share. Yes.
All right, here we go.
Yeah.
This is much nicer to look at than my face. Here we've got all the prescribed burns in the state over the last 5 years, barring the DNR from 2021-22, because they haven't finished mapping that yet. With a site like this, you can get to here off of the Illinois Prescribed Fire Council's homepage. You can see all of the burns completed over again the last 5-year period. Now, this is only part of Chicago Wilderness, as you well know. Wisconsin DNR maps some of their burns. It's point data, so somebody puts a point on the map, says we burned so and so many acres. It's a really useful tool. Again, that just covers WDNR sites, but it is out there. Nothing that I know of for the Indiana or Michigan portions, but if someone knows something, please let me know. So right now, folks send me this stuff once a year, or more often I'm reaching out and requesting that information. Then I put it into this database. We're trying to grow it year by year. Mark and Patty have asked if I can share this with Chicago Wilderness. So, that's awesome. You can submit stuff either to me directly, like you always have, or to Chicago Wilderness, and I can ask Mark to send it to me, whatever works best. I'm going to shut up, though, and see if you have any questions about what this database is, what it isn't, what kind of information we can provide to help you, and any other questions you might have.
I do have a question, and that is, what attribute data are included with these polygons?
That is an excellent question. We keep it pretty basic. The date, if you have it, sometimes that's not available. We do want the season. You can see the season runs from July 1st to June 30th. Source and owner is pretty easy. I calculate that myself. I can figure that out myself. Same with acreage. So if you can just give us the date, and if not the date, the season, we're good to go. We don't record anything else just because we're trying to keep things not simple, but keep it easy for everyone submitting data. And if I'm asking for wind direction or temperature from one person, I need to ask it of everyone. And some people, especially the smaller groups or individuals, just don't have that.
So this is I don't mean to say this, this is really easy data to submit. It's really a polygon and a date. So
that's what we try. And some people don't even submit that. I get things, paper copies that people have scanned in with just the Sharpie. They've drawn a boundary. And I'm like, fine, that's cool. I will digitize that. whatever you've got, we'll take it.
That's awesome, actually. So just so that the people who are still on the call understand, it is really important to at least have this on there, because Mark Johnston does use even just this relatively simple data to indicate that particular parcels actually are under active restoration management. So at this point, this is the easiest way of showing that there's active restoration going on in any particular parcel that you may be involved in the management. And there's also ways on the hub that you can put in other data. There's forms that Mark has created that you can do herbicide application or clearing, etc. Again, it's all pretty basic, which then kind of ups our game regionally to help, kind of illustrate all of the management that's going on. But this in particular, if you just even have a polygon, I love that you're willing to take even a hand-drawn map. For me, being able to take the basic data and put it into the hub and then have it automatically be given to you for this mapping effort is really, it makes it a whole lot easier than we can do it, because we can share that data. If you have a GIS program, you can share that data automatically then with the hub, and then it'll get sent to Dave and get this map updated. So that's really a great way to kind of just streamline that work stream.
Yeah, Mark's done a fantastic job setting this up. And again, those links I put in the chat, just check them out. He makes it very easy to submit data about whatever type of restoration work or management efforts that you're undertaking.
Yeah, and from that perspective, I think this mapping effort is great. From either your perspective or maybe John's, why do you think it's so important that we share these data with you?
Well, it's important you share the data with me because I only get paid if I do the work, and I really want to get paid. From John's perspective, though, it's probably important because by demonstrating just what's being done, different organizations can focus and direct their own efforts, their restoration work. I was at a meeting a couple of years ago with the Cook County Forest Preserve District and the Will County Forest Preserve District and a couple others. And one district brought out some maps, said, "Hey, this is some great stuff that we're doing. Can you just verify that we've got all this stuff, all the information about your properties next door?" And the other district, I'm not going to say who was who, looked at it and like, this is nice, but you forgot not only this trail, but also that we have a forest preserve here adjacent to yours. And, these things happen. But it's that type of thing when you don't have that information, you can't truly effectively plan your own management work. And beyond that, John mentioned earlier funding opportunities. If you can't show what's out there, then why should anybody, the state, let alone the federal level, direct resources this way?
That's a great.
John's got his hand up, and he probably has for a while.
Yeah, you talk about getting paid, Dave. I know you were doing this a long time without getting paid, so thank you for all your volunteer work over the years.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
The other thing I would add is that we've got now a solid 6 years of data, I believe it was, and as we continue to add on to that, we don't even know what we could do with this data, right? I know Bill Kleiman had engaged with a university to have them start looking at this data to see, just looking at it from different perspectives, right? So the grant thing is one key piece as well. The other thing is the fire needs assessment that the council did a number of years ago, and recognizing, the gap in fire on the ground that's needed and then what's actually happening, right? And so this map helps us sort of recognize how far away we are and then how close we're getting, okay? So that's why we're sort of beating the drum on trying to get people to submit their data, especially if you're doing this. Most of the agencies are already capturing this information. We don't need all the back information, so you could just send us the polygon. We don't need to know that it was a woodland or a prairie and all that, but that would be great too. I mean, the more information we get, the better. So yeah, hope folks continue to submit data, and it's really an easy thing to do. Again, Dave said he'll even do the actual, hand-drawn map, but we want to try to minimize that if possible.
Yeah, if possible, I'm all about minimizing the hand-drawn stuff. And we can go back to the folks down at Shawnee, both to my pleasure and horror, sent me 20 years of data earlier this year. So I just spent a week just cleaning stuff up, just working through that. But now we've got 2 decades of data out of the Shawnee National Forest. It's not all shown on this map, but it's there for researchers. And if you have older data, I'd love to get it in here.
So, Dave, we do have a question asking if there's any way to access this restoration and burn data without having a GIS account.
Yeah, so Dennis, a question for you then. Are you talking about uploading it to the stuff that Mark's got, or getting a copy of the data set itself? You're on mute. Okay, I'm just going to answer both questions.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
it's happening in my response. I'm just looking to get a visual on the data. So the maps are really cool. I like to kind of focus in on some areas that I'm interested in and just be able to see what's been mapped.
Yeah,
I tried to
definitely.
get on, it just told me I needed to have an ArcGIS account essentially.
No, you certainly do not. Go to this website here. That'll take you to that page, and you can zoom around. If you want the data itself, if you have a GIS capability that's offline, but you don't have ArcGIS online, that type of thing, I can just give you that shapefile. When we provide the data to third parties, we do restrict it a little bit. If a burn is on private land and they haven't given us permission to share that information, we exclude that, but everything else is in there. And that's about 90 or 95% of the total data set. Does that answer your question or not so much?
I think so. I'll follow up on your link, but I appreciate it. Very, very cool data set.
Thank you. And thanks to John and the Illinois Prescribed Fire Council for getting this going.
Well, we are just about out of time, and I thank you, Dave. Thanks, John and Kelly and Jackie for kind of having this discussion. Clearly, we need to do some follow-up. For those of you who may not have seen it, Jackie did post some information about S130 field day that's coming up on March 9th. If you are interested, she has her email address in there. If you know people on your staff or volunteers, they can do the training online and then do the field day. I did that. It was really seamless. It worked really well. And the field day was a tremendous amount of fun. And so I would encourage you to encourage your staff or volunteers to take advantage of that opportunity. And thanks everybody for coming today. It was really great to see so many people sign up. Brandon, any closing thoughts, ideas?
Yeah, just quickly, a few quick things. As we mentioned, we are having a team meeting on Tuesday, the 24th, for the Healthy Landscapes Initiative team. You're welcome to join that. It's from 9:30 to 11. And if you can't join that, we will definitely keep you in the loop around the conversations we had today. We want to pick up these threads at the team meeting about what next steps will look like. Further cafes, further conversations, further sort of small groups moving things forward. So there's going to be a lot more to come from us around these particular topics and around this initiative in the future. So if you have any questions or want to make sure you're on the list, please do reach out to Patty, to me, to Laura. And speaking of reaching out to Laura, if you have a suggestion for future Chicago Wilderness Alliance cafes, please do feel free to reach out with your idea to Laura Riley, the coordinator for Chicago Wilderness Alliance. Her contact information is right there on this slide. Usually the cafes are about an hour. We went longer with this one today because of these two deep topics we wanted to explore, and talking more generally about the Healthy Landscapes Initiative. And again, the climate initiative cafe is coming up on the 27th at noon, not at 1, at noon. And we do also want to offer a thank you and appreciation to IDNR and the Forest Service for their support of Chicago Wilderness Alliance and the Café series. Thank you again for coming. Look forward to much more from Patty, from me, and from the Healthy Landscapes Initiative team. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.